Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Derek Lambert, your host. So I know this one's going to get me in trouble, and I like it. Welcome back to the channel. Dr. Cooney, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on to discuss this important and provocative topic.
It is, isn't it? It's one of those piety, we should not even be talking about this. This is a big no-no. The sensitivities surrounding this topic are galore. There are so many people who get triggered, upset, pissed off, and cannot wait to do response videos. I'm looking for you, ladies and gentlemen. Dr. Cooney is an Egyptologist. That means she knows a thing or two about Egyptian mythology, especially when it comes to coffins. And am I coming in too hot, or am I coming through okay? Or
no, you sound okay. You sound okay.
I just don't want to cause you to have ear damage today.
No. I'm good.
Awesome. Dr. Cooney, is there anything in your CV that way I'm not reading a book because it's enormous and you have written so much? While you do that, I'm going to shamelessly plug your book, The Good Kings, and ask that people get a copy of it. But is there anything I missed in your CV that you'd like to address?
No, Egyptologist works. And since we're talking about religious studies today, understandings of divinity and how divinity worked in ancient Egypt in particular, I think is where we could go with some of these discussions. Yeah.
Totally agree. Check out our website, karacooney.squarespace.com. Also in the description, you can check out her Substack. Be sure to do so. And subscribe to her podcast on Apple Podcast. The book is absolute gold mine. You really need to get the mindset of ancient pharaohs to really grasp this. But let's give some context. I think it's important to let people know that I just harassed you 15 minutes ago.
Yeah.
This was a last-minute harassment call. I said, may I phone a friend during this stream to ask you about the bodies of ancient Egyptian gods and their mythologies? And then she said, I've got one better for you. How about I appear in person? And I just feel like Osiris, Isis, and Horus are raining down on me today. Set is taking, he's right now warded off. He's not involved with the situation right now, it seems.
I mean, Seth is haunting the discussion, but Osiris will be brought in as well. But yes. But if you had asked me yesterday, as I told you, Derek, there's no way I could have joined because I was teaching, and also I'm chair of the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Cultures at UCLA. And of course, we have our own encampment for freedom in Palestine. And we have counter protesters, and it's hot on campus. And so I'm there helping to make sure the students are safe. And it's a really interesting time to be on a college campus right now. So yeah.
Good on you. And I hope people learn more and more. It kind of spreads our minds to encompassing more ideas and seeing how we're all really united and connected, and why the hate, why. So I'm with you. I didn't want to derail too far into that, but I do think it's worth noting that sometimes our modern ideas, which are ancient, as your book, The Good Kings, points out over and over, we're still carrying the baggage of 5,000 years ago. It's important to educate yourself. So maybe we can try some new things. I know it's scary, but maybe we can pull together and find a way to do that. And I think the education we bring here at MythVision helps people to break out of some of the old ideologies. That being said, this book right here, which I was just going to go on this long rant by myself today and explain things in this book and point out why this book is not alone in its observations amongst biblical Hebrew Bible scholars. And there's 4 books I have pulled up from other experts. One is by Hamori in 2008. Another one is by Wagner in 2019 and Sommer 2009, and Marskis. I always mess this up. Marskis. I'm terrible with names. I'm terrible with pronouncing things. So 4 books talk about the anthropomorphic images and the visuals of God in the Hebrew Bible. And there's a going hypothesis that after the exile, depending on which scholar you think of, the Israelites did not have the image of Yahweh. They were kind of conquered and brought into a new empire, that Yahweh didn't save them. In fact, he wasn't strong enough, or he was defeated, depending on the writer or who this might have been at the time. And so they worshipped with aniconism, aniconic, I guess, no icons worship. And this prohibition to create images of Yahweh never meant Yahweh did not have a body. He was pushed out of the visual peripheral of the worshipers, of the followers, probably due to the exile. Don't know. I know Persians practice similar things with their deities, Greeks also, with philosophy coming in, but he had a body. Before that, they think he had images, which why would you say don't have images if they didn't have images already? And so I wanted to go back even further to the daddy of Canaan. I mean, really, they ruled for over a millennia, the Egyptian mythology, and how that may have influenced this region, and the ideas of the gods having a body, sex, scandalous ideas that were written about this God of the Bible in this book that have caused so much controversy online with you, Dr. Cooney. I'm done rambling.
Well, do you have any quotes that you want to pull out of the book so that we can get a jumping off part? Like, because I see you've got notes in there. Is there anything in there that you're like, this is crazy, and maybe you could read it aloud, and then we could discuss some Egyptian sorts of things, because the book is really it has made a splash in the ancient world of scholarship, but also among religious scholars in general, people who work on ancient religion. And I understand that when anyone produces a book about the Bible, it goes to an audience of believers, which doesn't happen in my world quite as much, right? When I produce a book about ancient Egypt, I don't have as many Egyptian religious believers as other as biblical scholars have to deal with. So it's its own issue, but yeah. But the Francesca's, Stavrakopoulou, yeah, and which is a great name for the book. So yeah,
absolutely. I'm going to the scandalous areas because she actually is pretty bold with these titles. I love it. She has a section called, let me pull it up. I want to read it. So she's going through the feet. What I love is how she goes through like each body part.
Mm-hmm.
And if you were to pick this apart and then look at your own research and mythology from Egypt, this would look like you'd be like, yeah, she's right in the ballpark of ancient Near Eastern, clearly this region's ideas of the gods. And it's all in the iconography. It's in the language. So we have archaeological evidence of it. We have visualizations of the gods. And Yahweh has these similar descriptions in the biblical text. I'm trying to get to the penis section because that's where the fun starts. Just so everybody knows, I love her titles too. She has one where she's going through the feet, and the title of this section is foot fetish. she's so good. Genitals, cover up. And she talks about an original statue of Jesus having no cover, no clothes covering his private area. And then next thing you know, they like welded on a bronze cloth over Jesus's genitals to like hide, and for the more pious, less sexual minded Christians, really, they were probably obsessed with it in their brains. They just had to avoid it at all costs. So, okay, she shows, let me show from her book. Better yet, that might even help us better. She's actually using Egyptian art, or really, this is, who is this guy?
It would be an Amun-Re, and she names him here as Amun-Re Kamutef. That's fine. Amun, bull of his mother. It's a wonderful name for a god. Amun, bull of his mother, means that he engenders his own future self by himself, by having sex with his own mother. So there's an incestuous component to it, but it's meant to be about the god creating his own body by himself. Essentially, Amun-Re Kamutef is the precursor of the virgin birth, of a god who can simply send his future self into a womb for gestating, and then he becomes a materialized human version of himself.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so yep, that makes sense. Oh, phallic masculinities. I might as well just take you. Oh, I love the beginning of this because she goes to describe how even today we use the language. she pretty much says, I can't give the whole book away, ladies and gentlemen. I'm kind of doing a shameless plug here, and we can bring your book up too if we need to. I imagine you have some context that people can get, but they need to get it. She pretty much, in a nutshell, says when Kim Jong-un was alive, he's like, I have a big button and it's a nuke, you know? And then Donald Trump goes, my button's much bigger and it's much more powerful and it works. It actually works. Well, this was all dick language. This was all locker room. I'm flexing on you, masculine, ha, ha, ha. And she goes into the symbolic nature of how we use sex and masculinity and penis in our everyday language. And this happens today. Guys are going, you know what I mean? I don't know if I lost you.
No, I'm here. So the idea of the of the penis being materialized architecturally or as a divinity is very, very old. And you could argue that the attempts to build the pyramid the first time, maybe not the step pyramid, but the first straight-sided pyramids, were attempt at a kind of penile architecture. And I'll tell you why. Because the pyramid builder, the first one of the straight-sided pyramid, is a man named Snefru, a king of the fourth dynasty of Egypt. And he had 3 tries to build a straight-sided pyramid. And he tried to build it with a high angle, like 60, 65 degrees. The pyramid was perfected by Khufu is 54 degrees. And so it's the angle that we expect when we see the Giza Plateau. But what they were trying to do was a much higher, steeper angle. And a pyramid is meant to be multiple things simultaneously. It's the body of the god, but it's a body of a sun god. It's light hitting the earth, but they want the light to hit the earth at a high angle. And so you get this tower up to the heavens. They were not able to do this on a large scale, but you could argue that the penis is essentially, that the pyramid is essentially a kind of phallic or penis symbol. I don't think it would be that crazy. And to see a shaft of light as created as an obelisk is meant to represent as a more perfected understanding of the stone penis light sort of thing. So anyone who can think of an obelisk in their mind, you've got that right there. Yeah.
She mentions the Noah story and how God promises with this bow in the sky, and that this bow, which also represents the symbol of a bow and arrow, also represents the phallus, and that there's almost both dual meaning in that context. And even Marduk, she brings up one of the passages from Marduk in earlier mythology where he's fighting Tiamat and the language is a bit sexual, but he's killing her, he's defeating her, which anyone who knows a little bit about this mythology knows that Tiamat represents the chaos dragon, disorder, and whatnot. In the biblical Leviathan figure is corresponding to that. And so what is this bow in the sky other than just the colors? It's a symbol. I won't flood again, but is this also a symbol of defeat? And here's my big junk, and I'm showing you in the sky in a symbolic way. You see what I'm trying to do?
And so it's essentially a rape. It's a violent penetration of her body that kills her. So it's a rape, but it engenders his future at the same time. And you can't get more of a patriarchal symbolism than that kind of violent extension of masculinity. So you do get that violence in Egyptian mythology. It's very Sethian. Seth murdering his brother Osiris. I think it's less of a rape and a penetration there. You don't have that Marduk Tiamat kind of connection, but you do have rape and violence, but it's of a different sort. It's of a different sort. And when Amun-Re-Kamutep, bull of his mother, impregnates his mother, he's not killing her simultaneously. So it doesn't have that violence of conquering the earth in association with it, or conquering chaos.
Right. Later on, you said, and I'm sure I've got a few books behind me that try to show how people equated Yahweh with Seth and the violence of Seth, but also the donkey kind of imagery that we see. There was like propaganda that was really trying to say, hey, the Jews, they don't show you the image that's in the temple, because it was almost like a mystery today. What's really in there? What's in the catacombs of the Vatican? What's inside that temple that nobody's allowed to go in but the high priest? And they would like make this idea that it's the head of a donkey. And they even have an image later with a crucified Jesus, donkey-headed man. And it's like in the Sethian tradition of pointing out Yahweh is this donkey-headed Seth, because they saw characteristics, I suspect, being taught that are in the Yahweh worship and that of Seth. I don't know if you have any connections off the top of your head between the two.
I have so many things to say right now. So first, and I don't know the scholar to connect it to, but there was an experimental archaeological discussion in a volume of Kemet, this Egyptological popular magazine that I don't think exists anymore. And the people were talking about Seth, and they were talking about genitalia, and bull genitalia in particular. And they did a dissection of a bull, and they removed the entire glands, testicles, and penis, the entire glandular system from the bull, and they took it out, and it looks like a Seth animal. It has a forked bottom, like a forked tail. It has these weird rabbit-like ears projecting off of it, the glandular structure. And then, of course, the penis nose is there for the bull. And when they put this out, I'm like, oh my God, it does look like a Seth animal. That the Seth animal, when we say that men are just thinking with their dicks, that Seth in many ways is that, literally, that he is the sexual glandular apparatus of a bull. And that bull that just thinks with that and only that. And so you could say that Seth is a giant penis. No one's proved this. And there needs to be more work done. But, when people are sacrificing bulls to the gods, they know the anatomy of the bull. When they're doing mummification and dissections, they know the anatomy of these different things. So I don't think it's that crazy and far off in an Northeastern African culture that comes from bull cult past, where the king is associated with the strong bull in all of his names in many texts, that you would understand this masculine virility that knows no boundaries, that can really go beyond its own self, and to divinize it. It's a really interesting thing. Yeah.
You made me think of the Ugaritic mythology with El. It's going to sound funny coming from my lips this way, but the way it's described in Francesca's book, and I wouldn't know where to exactly go to find it. We all know the golden calf story. You shall not, don't make the graven image. But why? Why are they making a cow or a bull that they're worshiping? What is the deal with the bull? And there's a lot of scholarship behind this bull as a symbol of the god Yahweh or El. They're fused by later authors as the same deity, which originally was not the case. And Ugaritic myth tells a story, and I don't know if it's two separate tablets. I am totally not an expert. So up front, I know that these two things exist in some of the literature about El, the god El. El's walking down some waterway. I don't know if it's the coast. I imagine it is if it's in Ugarit. And two goddesses walk by, and he starts to get aroused, and it shoots to the heavens. The women are like, the goddesses are impressed. They go with him to his house. They become his wives or concubines, and they're impregnated, and they have little godling offsprings. And of course, El was seen to do that in Ugaritic mythology. But then there's like another scene, and I don't know if it's part of the same tablet, where El is describing himself as a bull to Asherah or Atherat. And he's like, it's like bedroom talk. Like, you like big bull. You want big bull to come and do bull things to you, don't you? And like, it's in the tablet. And I'm like, man, that's pretty explicit stuff about God. The name El.
Yeah. I mean, it shouldn't be surprising to most people that when you have a mythologies are about lineages, they're about continuance of God, they're about creation. Creation and lineages need sex. And sex is a part of mythology. And the bodies of the gods are understood as merging with one another to create another generation and another generation that in most mythologies then finds its way to humanity, right?
Right.
And so
I
and
have
so
to shamelessly plug you. Go ahead.
but so, well, because good kings, yeah, I mean, you're talking about all of these different kings that associate themselves with the strong bull, and most of the kings in that book, their Horus names, are associated with a bull in some shape or form, because they want to say my dynasty will go on for forever, right? So
Right.
you want to be Osiris, you want to be Horus, but you also want to be explicitly sexual. And Ramses II's father, Seti the First, he maintains his Seth name, the one of Seth. And it shows his power and strength to have this name. It also shows his origins from the northeastern delta, from a more Semitic culture, a Semitic Egyptian hybrid culture. And so this idea of a Seth worshiper associated with Yahweh, associated with El, I mean, these things are all interconnected. Absolutely.
I'm shamelessly plugging everybody. You need it. I mean it. It's affordable. It is amazing. The Kings, and she goes into some really interesting family dynamics with these pharaohs. But love what you said. I guess another way of phrasing this, and I said this before we started streaming, to get your thoughts. Let me pen this thing so that it is supreme in our chat. The idea that God does not have parents or a family or children. Yes, we have this notion taught to us. You know, it's anachronistic for us to look back and go, yeah, El never had, or Yahweh never had a dad and never had a wife and never had children. How strange, I guess is another way to ask, is it that this God is depicted as not having a wife, not having children, or a lineage and family parental connections in some way later? I mean,
and not even having a body in some ways
right,
as well.
right.
So, an anthropomorphized body. And so I would say, as an Egyptologist, that the Egyptians, of course, did this first. And I would look in that book, The Good Kings, to the chapter on Akhenaten, and I would look at how Akhenaten became aniconic, as you mentioned at the startup of this live stream, that he wanted to depict divinity as nothing more than what could physically be seen and felt. And that was the sun in the sky. Many Egyptologists will call this the sun disk, the Aten. I prefer to call it the sun globe, because the Egyptians in relief do depict it in a globular type way. You can see the rounding of this. But this is a divinity that has no human body, has no wife, has no way of engendering himself to create a lineage. And he is alone. He is alone and solo in the sky. And Akhenaten makes that very clear, that this God is alone. There is no wife. Now, what Akhenaten does, which is very much like the Roman Catholicism that I grew up with, he then, but I am his prophet. I am his bodily representative on earth. I have my wife. I have Nefertiti, and I have all of the children that I have engendered. So I am his human representative here on earth in my body. And then he makes his body look all weird and strange. And it looks like a vision of light, I argue. It's a different discussion, but he makes his body look all weird and strange. Nefertiti's body looks all weird and strange. And all of their daughters' bodies look all weird and strange. And there's images of Akhenaten holding one of his daughters with his arm between her legs, kissing her full on the mouth, which is an unprecedented, must have been shocking image. And that image of sexual relation, I argue, sexual relation with his daughter, we do know those we're pretty sure that those relationships were consummated. And I argue that Tutankhamun himself is the product of one such father-daughter relationship. He's showing his sexuality, Akhenaten the king, while removing that sexual power from the god, the Aten, who is alone with no partner and no physical anthropomorphized body except for the heat and the light, the brightness, right?
Right.
He can't reproduce without the help of the human. So in many ways, I would argue, and I think Francesca does this as well, that by taking away the body of the god, you are giving that body to the humans who represent and prophesize for that God. And it's a way of shifting power from the heavenly realm to the human realm. and to the politics and discussions of that human realm. It seems the opposite, but I would argue in political terms that it does work to prop up the humans who are saying, how dare you worship a golden calf, or how dare you worship the image of a Seth animal. Or if we take it very literally for the Egyptians, how dare you worship a Seth animal, which is actually an embodied bull penis, maybe.
I think of Shamash, right? Really old sun deity.
Yeah.
And there are different forms where he's in his body, but she goes into examples where it seems that in later writers, they need to hide God's body behind a dark cloud, or because he's this brilliant light, his glory is brilliant light. And it makes me wonder, is it Shamash? Is it Akhenaten? Is it, because these are clearly earlier deities with these kind of descriptions. It makes me wonder, where is this influence coming from? And then I think of the Persians, and I wonder, are the Persians influenced by some of this mythology that we're talking about with Shamash or with Akhenaten? And this influenced Jewish thought. I don't know what the answer is. It's just fun to think about.
It is fun to think about, and diffusionism is always a dangerous game. So if you're going to say, oh, the Persians got this from there, and the Hebrews got this from here, then you're always going to be assigning a great man or a great woman, but it's almost always a man, theory to history, that it can only be developed once. And that one time then has to move across the globe in some way, which we know isn't. Wow, my camera really is moving. It's kind of cool. It's weird.
I told you.
Look, it's the weirdest. I don't know what to do with that. But anyway, there's got to be a way for me to turn it off. But I have not gotten there with my
following you.
But it is a really weird and interesting thing to then take away that body of the God. What was I talking about though? I was talking about something.
The one time for all, like,
diffusionism, right? So everyone on this planet has the sun, unless you're off in Norway and half the year you don't really get the sun, and then it'll probably be more powerful. But the sun is a part of everyone's religious mythologies before Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Mormon traditions come about. The sun is always going to be a divinity, and people are always going to have stars that are certain divinities, and the earth will be a divinity, and none of these things need to diffuse to something else or from someplace else. So you can have independent creations of these things, or you can have flashes of connection, and then somebody else takes that idea much further. So if Akhenaten is the one to create this idea of a bodiless God, or a God without an anthropomorphic existence, then that idea, maybe it did diffuse. Maybe there was this one person that created this idea, and then it went, into different places. Or maybe just certain people heard of this idea and went with it, or maybe it was developed simultaneously, independently in multiple places. Right. Egypt and the highlands of the Levant are very, very close, however.
Right.
And I would argue that there was connection here.
That's what exactly how I feel, is that they ruled the region. I mean, it's kind of silly to think that the propaganda of the divinity didn't make its way into the region somehow and influence in some way. And it makes me wonder, where did these ideas penetrate Akhenaten's mind? Like, did he learn something from some cult that was obscure that I don't know, you know what I mean? Like, you just kind of wonder what inspired that. But the book that I was talking about earlier, just for those who are interested, that's The Evil Creator, The Origin of a Christian Idea, Early Christian Idea. And it goes in, and it pretty much goes into breaking down like Marcionite Christianity and why there were like Sethian Christians, Phoebionite Christians. He says this book examines the origins of the evil creator idea chiefly in light of the early Christian biblical interpretations. It's divided into two parts. In part one, the focus is on the interpretations of Exodus and John. Firstly, ancient Egyptian assimilation of the Jewish god to the evil deity Seth Typhon, and is studied to understand its reapplication by Phoebionite and Sethian Christians to Judeo-Catholic creator. Secondly, the Christian reception of John 8:44, understood to refer to the devil's father, is shown to implicate the Judeo-Catholic creator in murdering Christ. Part two focuses on Marcionite Christian biblical interpretations. It begins with Marcionite interpretations of the creator's character in the Christian Old Testament. And then it goes into pretty much showing you why the God is viewed evil. that this God, Yahweh, is actually an evil creator, and there's another God. They have to explain why
I
there's
have
so
to
much
read
bad.
this. I have to read this. I don't know this one. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not too
Cool.
big. It's a little simple something.
Who's
but
the
it
press?
overlaps.
Who's the press?
This is Oxford University
Oh,
Press.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a fun read.
Yeah.
And it just makes you kind of go, whoa, because he brings out some interesting things in early Christianity to show you actually there's a lot of involvement with Egyptian mythology and ideas in Christian minds. It's almost like Christianity becomes the thing it gets near. It's very Roman-y when it's in Rome. It's very Silk Road Eastern when you get, in those areas. When you go to Alexandria, Egypt, what are you going to find? A very Egyptian spin of it. And it just mutates to the region quite well. And I think that's what's made it so successful for so long. Add that to its mission statement of like, we need to make everyone like us. That kind of helps it, I think, become successful.
Yeah. And so much of early Christianity is really forged in Egypt, from the divine birth to the mother and child to the, escaping in the marshes from the people trying to murder them, the Sethian people trying to murder them. I mean, there is this idea of an evil God and a good God. Evil is a strong word. The Egyptians wouldn't have used it, but a God of force and a God of peace and truth. And that those two are always in antithesis to one another is a very ancient Egyptian idea. And to see that in early Christianity is wonderful. So I'll have to pick that up.
Absolutely. There's so many things to read.
But can I go back to the donkey thing?
Yeah.
So,
yes.
So because I went off into, the gland of the bull kind of deal. So I was just in Egypt, like a couple days ago, and I was in temples, and particularly the temple of Edfu, where you see Seth being ritually murdered by Horus, and he takes the guise of a hippo. Little tiny hippo in most cases, because you don't want to draw him too big, because then the evil or disordered chaos of the god, but though in the Ptolemaic times we might use the word evil, could come to the fore and could take over. So there's this tiny little adorable hippo being speared by a Horus god image that is very giant. He's also sometimes depicted as a donkey, and he's sometimes called the tortoise, and he's sometimes depicted as an antelope. So all of these creatures, the donkey is not a creature of the desert. The donkey is a beast of burden. And it's a creature with an enormously large male member, as we learn from, the Apuleius is the golden ass and other stories, but or just going out into nature ourselves. But the idea of the tortoise and the antelope, animals of the desert and of disorder, or of the hippo, which took out more women and children and people than the crocodile in ancient Egypt. These are all animals in association with that fierce strength of this masculine divinity. To go back to that pissing contest that you were talking about between Kim Jong-un and Trump, right?
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. There's so many layers to this. It's a fun exploration. At first, I must admit, I was just a fundamentalist evangelical Christian, and then it was like so much shocking, overwhelming information. You kind of use it as a weapon, and you're thinking like, and there's probably still some of that, I imagine, always going to be there. But I'm actually enjoying learning this because it's our past. It's what we've done and how we've dealt with these stories, how we observe the world, and just knowing and learning that, I think, is interesting. Also, learn from your mistakes.
Always. And always correct yourself if you're an academic in print. There's no shame in it. It's fine. If you're thinking changes, that's okay. Instead of diffusion, I like to think of the way thoughts and ideas spread as kind of like an adolescent rebellion. And let me explain what I mean. So you grew up evangelical Christian. I grew up Roman Catholic. We had bodies all over the place. We had the Virgin Mary, and she's got boobs out. You get to see naked Virgin Mary boob, which is extraordinary, right? When you think about it. I grew up in a church that would depict naked bodies on the regular. This was normal, having bodies. The saints would be depicted like partially naked, and their clothes ripped off, and they're being murdered by the Romans. And it's kind of this weird violence porn kind of thing. But Catholics love their bodies. right? They do.
Right.
And remember, I grew up in Texas with a whole lot of Baptists where there's no body allowed. And
Right.
it's an interesting thing if I'm thinking of these ideas of religion being about reaction to what happened before, then the Luther, you know, any sort of Lutheran understanding of Christianity is, or just Protestant in general, is there is no, we need to get rid of the icons completely. There can thus be no bodies. And you could even look at the larger religion of Islam and say there can be no depicted bodies, not of the prophet, right, not of God, not of anything. There is no body, right? Catholicism was, and Christianity in general, though there is aniconic Christianity, was more embracing of this body. But isn't it an interesting thing then to look at the development of the Yahweh cult and its interest in a bodilessness as a reaction to whatever is there causing it problems? So it could be the Yahweh with Asherah, older mythologies. It could be the Marduk and Tiamat. It could be Osiris and Isis and Nephthys and Seth. But it's a reaction as in, we are not these things. That administration is the old administration, we're the new administration. And there is this sort of rejection or rebellion from those things, and throwing a baby out with the bathwater in large part. And I do see a lot of this as just reactions against those who had power before.
I love the way you took that to a simplified human realm for a moment, instead of out there in la la land and trying to make sense of this.
We're the ones writing this stuff. We're the people who are coming up with these mythologies, right?
Right.
So yeah.
This idea makes me kind of want to get your words, and maybe you have an example of a particular brand, and then a later sect comes along, as Akhenaten might be one of them, because I know that was a big one. But this idea, when I talk to Bible believers, people who defend the Bible on various scales, I think it's becoming a more and more trend from those who want to be smart to take a position to go, we're not saying it's inerrant. We're saying it's reliable. We're saying that it's trustworthy. We're saying that it gives us the gist and enough to be like, we're on the right track with God. What happens, no matter who and what spectrum of that scale is, often most of them will say, the Bible says, they'll quote an author, a prophet, of someone who's part of a particular brand of the cult of Yahweh that does not venerate Asherah, that totally vilifies these temples outside of Jerusalem, that does not agree with bull imagery or whatever it is. They accept the word of this literature because they're taught, I would say, indoctrinated or told, due to the political gist and flow of the river, so to speak. They're told to accept Jeremiah's word on this and told to accept Isaiah or whatever it might be. I guess I'm at a point now where I'm like, I don't trust those guys. I mean, sure, in their cult, that's what they did, but I want to know about the ones before. I'm curious to know, what were the different Yahweh versions? And that they want to almost accept the word of these guys that the original was always this one.
Right.
But we know the facts and evidence on the ground does not point to that. It points to the contrary.
Just reading your 2 Kings and looking at, or your Exodus, and looking at how many people are doing what is not meant to be done, whether it's worshiping a golden calf or making a burnt offering or doing something in a way that is inappropriate, worshiping more than one God, having some sort of cult activity that's considered problematic. The more you see that, the more you realize that so much of the Old Testament is a move by a particular group of men who are trying to create a new power structure that's in opposition to something that was there before. And that while they're creating it, everyone is just continuing on with this religion that is much older than this Yahweh cult, that has been there for millennia, and that connects to all of these different streams of politics and economies and goes back much farther. But this new Yahweh cult and this new way of seeing God is a reaction to power. It's a reaction to older power systems. The whole Old Testament is a throwdown of power, right?
Absolutely. I think that's interesting. Is there any examples that you could think of? Because we didn't come prepared, obviously, but of a cult that was the typical going thing at the time, and then a new one comes in and it claims to be like, now this one's actually the most authentic and earlier, but we know from scholarship that's anachronistic, and in fact there's no evidence to suggest this Johnny come lately Yahwist only, there are no other gods in the sky but him kind of thing is invented by this propaganda machine of men wanting to usurp earlier power for whatever their potential. We may not know their real motivations. It may be come to my temple cult and spend money. I'm the priest and you need to come through me. It may be multiple things. It might be, I don't want to get into psychological and pretend that they didn't believe these things. I think there were real superstitions in their minds that were alive, but there's almost like a Joseph Smith effect, I would almost say. Like they really believe, but they're also making up stuff along the way. While I don't know. I mean, I could be wrong about that, but is there examples?
I love your connection to Joseph Smith, because Joseph Smith does not throw out Jesus Christ.
Right.
It's the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Right.
The Yahweh cultists do not throw out Yahweh and create something new. They keep Yahweh. They throw out Asherah. They throw out the bull. They throw out the anthropomorphic depiction. Akhenaten does not throw out the sun god. He keeps one particular aspect of it, which pre-existed all of these different sun gods. The Aten, he maintains that, but he throws out Amun-Re, keeps the word Re, and he throws out Atum, though less so. So they have to keep something that was there before. You can't start with a clean slate. You have to start with the fervent belief that is already there, and then you continue with that. So that image of God with the erect phallus that you showed at the beginning, this almond bull of his mother, and then I was like, oh yeah, it's this incestuous creation of himself with his own mother, and people probably went, oh God, horrible. But this God had to be removed by Akhenaten, and he had to, yeah, there we go, and he had to say that this God was not real, did not exist, erased his names and erased his images wherever he could find it, and say to people, that's not God anymore. And here is God. It's this disc, it's this globe, whatever it is, this image of the sun, and I am its offspring. And that is the way. So it's all of these men who are trying to step into a very strong and entrenched, already existing religious system that is part of the political economic world, right? There's no other way that it could be anything else. They take one element of it and they say, oh, this is the truth. And this is what I say in The Good Kings about Akhenaten. It's a brilliant social separator. So you can actually then say, who's with me and who's against me? And so when you then take one small part of a pre-existing religious mythology that has deep fervent belief associated with it, you say all of those people are wrong and I am the true, this is the truth, then you can easily separate who's with your regime, your living human actual regime, and who is against it. It's a way of ideologically laundering politics. It's a way of creating a truth test for who's going to follow you and who's not, because ideology cannot be proven or disproven. The sociologist Michael Mann makes this very clear, and it's a really wonderful statement. That's why it is the most powerful of the social powers. You can go into some place and you can say, all of this Christian stuff, Jesus Christ is great, but like Joseph Smith said, he pre-existed all of the Hebrew Bible stuff. He was in the Americas before. I am his prophet. I am here telling you all of this stuff. All of that stuff that you saw before, some of it is right, a lot of it not so much. I am here to tell the truth. And those who then follow him are rewarded with houses and money and wives in the political system that he's able to create. So it works. It works really well. And it works in our political system, our American Christian, Judeo-Christian political system. It works very well. And I think it worked pretty well for Akhenaten. It has a short-term success and long-term repercussions, but and you have to keep one-upping it, which is why that book by Litwa, you said, the Oxford University Press book, is talking about all the Christians who were fighting each other, because the ideology is used to drive the political, to weaponize the political. And so this Christian is now a heretic. That Christian is now a heretic. And who's going to win? It's going to be the guy with the biggest army, but it's also going to be the guy who's better at ideologically laundering what the political message is. And you have to keep one-upping it. So, you know, you're going to get Luther coming along, and a Lutheran religion and a Methodist religion and a Baptist religion. And it's going to go on and on and on, right? Which is why we have to say Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Mormon, or why I do. Because you always have to one-up it and say, this is the actual truth.
I love how you phrase that. And in fact, I think this is so important for people to see and to try and understand. I really, really do. There's always the one-up. Someone in the chat earlier was talking about bring up the body of God and with a Muslim scholar or an Islamic scholar, and they'll explain to you, of course it's different. Of course it's going to do something radically new and different. And in fact, it is in the competition of ideas theologically and particularly politically, because it became this regime that conquered the world in like a century. I mean, they literally conquered like crazy. The only people who outdid them were the Mongolians. And again, they had their own propaganda and their own, everybody's doing this. It's a curious case from my own experience on why I just believed the words of the book and its account and never second guessed or doubted or criticized it. You know what I mean?
Because ideology is the most powerful of the social powers. Who's going to tell you it's wrong? Who's going to tell you it's right? There's no way you can prove it. Though there are people that go out and try to find the lost army of Pharaoh in the Red Sea. Good luck to them. There's no way you're going to prove it. And that's its power. That's how it works. And the indoctrination is part of the lineage, because as soon as you have children into any religious belief system, dare I say any cult, right? The success of your children depends on their belief in that larger ideology. It is beholden upon every stakeholder within a religious system to then pass it on to their children so that they are safe, so that they are rewarded within that system. And if they turn away, then they will be called a heretic. They will be ostracized. And, you know, the only reason that you were able to turn away is because there are other social systems in a modern, and I'm not trying to extol modernism by any stretch, but there are other systems that you can turn towards. And there's so much competition that that there are other places to look to. Yeah. But it's all about politics. It's all about politics.
Yeah, that religion is, right? There's so much in there. I love what you brought up about the early Christians. They were at each other's throats
figuring out
ways. Yeah. Figuring out ways to like set up what is the text? What do these texts mean? How does our theology work? And wrestling over the centuries. And it didn't end when, you know, it became a political power and they figured out what is what. It kept going. It's clear that many ideas continued that were not in line with the orthodox view. But this book on Yahweh caught a lot of attention because some of the interpretations that Francesca had brought up were her own kind of, it's a little complicated, but some of the body parts are euphemistically symbolic for other body parts. A foot can symbolize for the penis. Like today, we do it and we don't even realize it. Well, maybe we do if we think about it. I'll give you an example just for the audience. When a man's foot size is always, what size shoe are you wearing? We know how big his stuff is.
Everyone does that. Come on.
Right. So the shoe or the foot symbolizes the male part.
And the nose.
And the nose. So there's different examples of body parts that mean other things. The woman's special area is like a garden. It's symbolized in garden language even today, but in that time with agricultural, you know, farming and whatnot, it was prevalent. And so she pretty much tries to make the connection that the rainbow, the symbol of the war, also has a euphemistic term for the penis. And she goes into the story about Jacob wrestling God. And at the end, there's this idea that it touches the hip bone. And to this day, there's a dietary restriction from eating the meat near the hip bone or something. Well, she thinks there's something connected to the male phallus as well. And then one more that really got her in trouble with others is that God in his temple, when Isaiah has the vision of God in his temple, it says the dangly bits or something in Hebrew filled the temple. And she understands it and says, I think this is actually talking about Yahweh's junk filling the temple, that he's so big and powerful, it's his penis that fills the temple. Man, the apologists have really lost it on that one. They're so annoyed by God, having a private part to begin with. I'm calling it a private part because I'm trying not to overuse too much language.
It's not just the penis. The ancient people knew this, right? It's the whole glandular system, and it's the testicles as well. Right. So this thing being dangling, and this protuberance, it is something that changes and has a will of its own. So men say, right? It has a mind of its own, and to then divinize it. The Egyptians didn't have any problem with this. Most ancient religions don't have any problem with. Every ancient religion has a god that is like thinking with his dick all the time. That is just this overt masculinity, and the idea that the god spreads his seed. I know she talks about this in the book. Yes. This idea of spreading seed. How can you just make it agricultural? Somebody spreading seed is a literal ejaculation, and to not put it into that context is, if people want to be asexual about things, they can try. But this is also why you get so many weird culty Christian groups that also engage in sexual activity that they're trying to hide, that is highly aberrant, because you're not allowed to talk about it, right? Yeah. This is normal, natural, human, animal, mammalian stuff. And to make mythology out of it is a regular human thing to do.
Yeah, I needed your 2 cents on that, because I get it. Some scholars might disagree with that interpretation on the meaning of that. But the whole picture, that what they're doing is they're trying to fight any single example she might give about a particular idea, and then act like there is nothing to it altogether. And the books I just read over the past, I'd say 10 days, there were 4 books I've read on God's body from 4 prominent scholars. And I crafted a new documentary I'm putting together that goes a different path than what her book does, because this is not an academic book. It's more of a popular audience. Like yours is not academic. You could write an academic, but this is easy to understand for people to follow, and you make it relevant to today. She does the same thing with Yahweh, right? And you and her are both doing that. But the point I was getting at is the language that the authors that I was reading point out that describes humans, that we would not bat an eye over, describing the man's feet and his arms and how he's using his strong arm. And even that has somewhat of a symbolic, like the strength of my arm helped me carry through the day. Now, it's not literally like I just carried the day on my arm in a literal sense. There's symbolic meaning, but that I have an arm. You don't deny my body. And one of the scholars actually highlights that the language describing humans in the ancient Hebrew is the same exact language that is describing Yahweh or El, same deity, and that the images that we see for humans, because we don't have the iconographic images of Yahweh like we'd like, there are debates over a few visuals on some jars and things. Is that Yahweh and Asherah? We're not sure. Point is, they're not supposed to have visuals. Well, the language describes the visual of the God, and it sounds like any other human and any other gods. And so I'm nailing that down to point out, like, even if they couldn't have actual visuals, the verbal language gives the visual. You can see it through the words.
Even the god Aten has a hand. The god Aten is just this sun disk in the sky, and his rays emit from his body, but they terminate in hands, and those hands hold the symbol of life. And that symbol of life is then given to the nostrils of Akhenaten and Nefertiti and their daughters. And so you could argue that the Aten's ejaculation of light is there, but it's anthropomorphized using a hand. And the hand is often associated with the penile extension as well. And to give you an Egyptian connection to the strong arm that you mentioned, it may surprise your listeners to know that the strong arm of the god, whether it was Atum or Amun-Re or Amun Jesser-Ah, Amun, the god that you just showed with the erect phallus.
Right.
He's called Amun Sacrative Arm, and there are texts that say, may I act with my arm in my hand. Arm in particular, because the arm is the thing that helps the god come back to life. How? When the god dies, like Osiris or the sun god, the part of them that comes back to life first, that has a mind of its own, if you will, is the penis, which then becomes erect. And then the god is able to reach out with his arm, with his hand. His feminine element is sometimes thought of as the hand, but he uses his arm, the masculine element, to reach out and grab it. And then he uses the arm to ritually masturbate himself back into a new existence. So anytime you see a strong arm in a Hebrew text, I would encourage people to think, what other textual associations would you have had with this strong arm? Because the Egyptians, they definitely put it in a masturbatory creative context.
Wow.
So it works for me. Yeah.
That is so fascinating. I'm so glad you picked up my call and said, I'm going to come on here and talk about this stuff. The feet, the arm, the hand, the eyes, the evil eye. I wanted to bring that up with you because there is this rabbit trail that I went down after reading the 4 books. Then I went through this little rabbit trail in the Matrix online, and I was like, oh my gosh, Asherah is a Thirat in this earlier Ugarit stuff. But then there's these Macedonian inscriptions. I think it's Macedonian. That's later. Forgive me. I can't think of the name of the actual region. It's in the Syrian region, and it is the god Tanit. And Tanit is associated with Athirat and Asherah. Well, the symbol on one of these inscriptions, an Adrud, Tel Adrud, butchering, probably pronouncing exactly what that is. There's a hand, and it has, you could tell, like a Phoenician Canaanite dialect, Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew, and they're asking for protection from Yahweh and Asherah, right? And so there's this, typically scholars attribute the hand symbolically saying the person who's dead is asking the god to protect their grave so that while they're in the underworld, they're not disturbed and they can have peace. But there is this little interesting connection. I'm possibly saying he's asking Asherah to protect him because all of these hand symbols work in Tanit as well. On a lot of the inscriptions and standing stones, the goddess Tanit has her hand on there. Well, then you go further into the evolution and you find that in Jewish, Christian, as well as Muslim hand art of the symbol, there's like a hand. They usually put it on.
They call it the Hamsa. They call it, it means the five. The five.
Yeah.
In Arabic, Hamsa means 5. Yeah.
And
you have the eye in there.
Exactly what I was going to ask you about, warding off evil. They had magic and superstition in their mind about the evil eye, which we know ancient Egyptian. So tell us about that.
The ancient Egyptians associated the hand, Jeret, in the ancient Egyptian language, with the feminine element of every human body. So if a male god or a male human wanted to come back to life after death, they had to masturbate themselves back into existence. Very, very physical, very literal. And they used their arm, which was their masculine part, penis, obviously, and their hand. The hand was thought of as a feminine womb enclosure. It was a way of enclosing and keeping something safe. And so the idea of the hand, the Hamsa, being associated with feminine divinity, a feminine archetype, is on point from an ancient Egyptian perspective. That works. It works in an understanding of where creation comes from with masculine divinity and feminine divinity. Yeah.
And as far as the evil eye goes, can you give a rundown or a brief description of what that is? What is the evil eye? What does it mean? Like bad, almost like bad luck, or like omen, negative omen that could potentially, the wrong look on you from the god, or something to that effect, maybe other people as well?
Anytime you go into an Egyptian temple like Edfu or Dendra, you see that people who have taken the temple over as a church have destroyed all of the eyes. They have come in and they have chiseled out the eyes in that temple, lest any of those divinities be able to see or look upon whoever is in there. The understanding is that they believed that those things were made alive. Maybe they were evil in their estimation as Christians, but they had become alive. And they would often go after the nose and the mouth as well. So the eyes are that thing that a mammal, a human, will connect to another person with. You look at each other in the eyes. And when a mammal holds eye contact too long, it's a threat. And we are taught to lower the eyes and show our subservience to somebody else with that lowering of the eye. And you know that this gets as masculine as you can possibly get. My husband was just in a bookstore and some kid came at him because he was standing too close to his girl in a crowded bookstore. And he's like, you got a problem? And he's like, the eye contact, right? And you have to, right? It's like how am I going to F you up? Like you look in the eyes and you have this look and this like laser beams are shooting from the eyes or whatever. But you know that look when somebody wants to fight you. They look in your eyes and it is all about eye contact. And that is the threat. I would go with that being the mammalian source of threat. Mm-hmm. And among the mammals, I think the dog is the only one that'll make sustained eye contact with a human. And we all know that you've got to lower your eyes at a certain point. There is a connection and there is a threat in that sustained eye contact. You do pass oxytocin with a mother and a child looking at each other using the eye. So the eye can be threat laser beams, or it can be like that connection. In Egyptian, the hieroglyph for the eye can mean many different things, but one of the most basic is that it means to do, to make, to act. It is creation in and of itself. So that by looking at something, to see it is to make it, to visualize it is to materialize it. And that understanding of the eye, then if you look at somebody in a particular way, you can magically materialize something that's very, very problematic. And but the eye can mean other things. An eye that's beautified in the Egyptian language can mean beauty, loveliness. Mm-hmm. It can the eye with all of the tear ducts and all of the other elements can mean wholeness and has a more feminine association with those last two. But the eye is a verb. It can be to bless or to curse. If you like, in the Egyptian understanding. And so people are, they're wary about all of that human eye contact. Yeah. Whether it's a relief or a statue or a real thing, doesn't matter, right? Yeah.
The eyes are powerful. And what I love about what you just described is you never really overly focused on just saying the eye is just for sight so that you could just see things. Of course, people can see things, but there's always a layered meaning, and getting back to the historical, cultural understanding of how they function, the body parts function, is so foreign from us when we're reading this text, because we're not acquainted with kind of using that symbolic way of how they operated and functioned with those things. In some
Derek, we don't know what our bodies are anymore. What was the latest podcaster or YouTuber or something who was like, men don't know female genitalia? Did you follow this?
I did not.
Was it Joe Rogan or something like that? Where the men don't know where a clitoris is. They don't understand where tampons go. It made the news everywhere. It was this whole like, men don't understand anatomy. And we just discussed this on my podcast. I'm like, this is bullshit. It's not that men don't, it's that we're all in our little weird Instagram, Facebook, YouTube bubbles. And we're not as materialized in this world. We're not as embodied in this world. We're not living on a farm. You're not dealing with the cow giving birth. So you have to reach your hand up inside the birth canal to pull the calf out, which is something all of us would have done in the ancient world and been a part of, right? Wow. We are very disembodied today. And I think that our religious ideologies help us or encourage this disembodied nature, that this fear of the human body and this embodiment is part of the reaction to this book that we're talking about. So, I would say that more discussion of actual human anatomy is right, but human anatomy in the ancient world, this is just part of the way things were. People didn't have privacy. People didn't have, these ideas of never seeing anybody's naked body or never seeing sexual activity before a certain age. This doesn't happen in the ancient world. And everyone would have had a very visceral, if I may, understanding of human anatomy, where things went, how and why. And so to understand power in terms of the parts of the human body makes perfect sense.
My hope is that more people come across you and learn from you and understand these things, because I don't just do this for like mental masturbation. Brilliant ideas. Like, I had to use that term in light of
You
the show.
go for it. We're going for it. It's fine.
Right. We might as well be raw. And, you know, I struggled as a Christian with sexuality, with looking at things on the internet and, you know, having that struggle and realizing more and more as I learn about ancient religion that this piety driven perception is so foreign to what we're really seeing in these texts in the ancient world. And there's something beautiful as an atheist, something beautiful about how human the gods are, even though there's some ugly stuff out there, but like how they reflect the human perception. Bad shit with patriarchy, there's bad shit with all sorts of stuff that we can clearly identify. But when we debodied God, it almost feels like we've debodied ourselves with these very pious, ascetic type philosophies from the Greek and Roman world that we started inheriting, and we need to be more this and that, and so much that they're whipping themselves in the back. The monks are, they're finding ways to satisfy the divine, and by getting rid of the flesh, it's an ugly thing to me that we're trying not to be what we are, that is human. And I don't know,
No, I totally agree with you. I think that it's important to see how much political power there is in disembodying God. Because if you disembody God, then the only body is the human. And so whatever prophet is claiming to be the one who is telling you the truth about God, it's their body that everyone is beholding, looking at, making sacred in a sense. And so there is a real short-term political power in that. But then once you scripturalize it and you make it into something that this is the religious way forward, whether it's Joseph Smith or Martin Luther or whoever it is, and you disembody God, then as above, so below. As you believe above, then it will be down below. And then everyone is supposed to disembody themselves from the human body. And bring that into the digital age in which we're talking to each other in this way, in which I'm teaching more and more classes in this way. And this disembodiment just goes to another level in which I think we all feel very alone and very separate from a community of people. And it's an interesting time to try to bring that back. You say you're an atheist. I'm returning more and more to a polytheism. As was, which is pretty cool. How does one practice that? I mean, there's really no way. But I mean, I suppose I could join some weird coven, but not my style. But to look at divinities as embodied masculine, embodied feminine, embodied trickster, as an earth goddess, and to think that right now the earth goddess must not be very happy with the human species, right? I find myself more and more working with those ancient kinds of ideas, and I think they help me to embody myself in this place and time. But yeah, we'll see how that evolves.
This gets into the weeds, and I'm glad we're going deep. This is deep. I hope everybody watching likes this right now. Let's get more attention to this show. Share it, because I think this is necessary. People hear. And for me, I love the way you describe that, even though I call myself an atheist, meaning I don't literally actually believe there's something going on. I see the utility, though, in what you're describing, because even though I'm this rational, trying to explain things scientific person, I live with an internal narrative, a crafted narrative in my mind that I tell myself, Derek, you're going to have a good day. You're going to do great. You're going to accomplish much, overcome that difficult thing. And I'm saying that these deities you're describing can become symbols of those things that we humans look to in the world around us. You don't even have to actually literally think there's actually a goddess or a god, but they can be pragmatic. And I love that you're humanizing them. Don't be guilty about the body. I've met you in person, and I know the person that you are, how much loving you are to your child, your son. He may be wild right now and young, but you love him. There's so much that you've taught me, and I respect that. I'm not like this guy who you must think like me, but you could see the pragmatic utility on making those symbols mean something. And I don't know.
But you can also see how useful it was for Henry VIII to say, I want a divorce. This whole Protestantism is sweeping the globe. I'm going to get a hold of this. I'm going to say that we can't have any icons. I'm going to take every church down. I'm going to dismantle every monastery. I'm going to sell the land off. I'm going to give it to my loyal elites, the ones who agree with me. I'm going to say that we're starting this new chapter, and that there's no God to look at anymore. It's me, right? So Henry VIII is the leader of the Church of England. Is he a saint? No. Is he the Son of God? No. But he's the body that everyone now looks at, because God is not meant to have a body. Do you still have Jesus on the cross? This is one icon they didn't really get rid of in the Church of England. Though if you're looking at German churches and the German Protestant churches, you just whitewash everything. And many other, see, it's doing it again. Church, I don't know, but churches in England, they would whitewash all of these walls that had all of this anthropomorphized story being told. There is a political utility that we are still using, and there's a political utility to making sex scarce as the leader of your church. So whatever pastor or leader of your church was, they had their life, but to tell you could not have sex in this way or that way, unless you do exactly as I say, you have to go through me to get to this thing that every human being wants. That gives you extraordinary power to make that sexual commitment connection scarce. And that you have to reify it through a certain system. There's extraordinary power in that. You just let people go and have sex with whomever they want. You've lost your control over a massive amount of people. This is social power in every way. Disembodying God creates a whole lot of social power, but a whole lot of trauma. A whole lot of trauma at the same time.
It's like we're living in an experiment right now. Like, and you'll hear the moralist, I'm using the word moralist to mean the high and mighty in their moral standards, going, the reason Rome fell is the phallus. They had the phallic symbols all over the wall. There was all this debauchery and orgies and down came Rome. And it's like, okay, so you let them go wild, you lose your empire, everything falls apart, chaos, and there's no order. And then you have the moralists who say, we keep control over what people are allowed to do, say, think, et cetera, and at least we have order. And that's where you kind of get conservatism, politically speaking, too, that plays into this. Where do you draw the line, and how do we navigate this world today, Kara?
But who does it serve, this conservatism? Because those men at the top get to have sex with as many, as young, as whatever they want, right?
Or they do it and no one knows, so they have to sneak off and...
Maybe, but it does. Yes and no. I mean, in so many circles, if you have a strong patriarchal society, there is no loss of face or prestige or reputation for having outside sexual activity. It actually adds to this idea of the bull, the strong one. Sometimes, yes, it can be problematic, but the more patriarchal, the less of a problem we seem to have with these things, and the easier it is to overlook those kinds of things. And you say, well, men will be men, boys will be boys. This is the way that it is. But it also means that some people get to hoard masses of sexual activity and other people get none. And that's all a power play. That's all a power play as well. So it leads you all back to Seth and Yahweh and all of these understandings. And it makes me think of Akhenaten, where the sexual activity that he displays is for him and him alone. Any king who has a harem at his disposal, all of the sexual activity for him and him alone, and all of these other men are shut out. Could put Joseph Smith in there too.
I was just thinking of all these kings that have many wives, and the polygamy that runs rampant. I don't see any girls married to several men and having them and concubines and such. You're right. I mean, obviously, we know which way that's geared, and people will have excuses for why that's justified, but the other way around is not. It's so many things. Is there anything we didn't talk you might want to mention or that we need to cover before we get to super chats?
I'm looking. I mean, I love the way she moves the book from the feet to the head. I was on the roof of Kansu Temple, where they have all of these feet carved into the rock to show that a pilgrim had come to that space. And I like the feet also being the idea of a hard-won journey, hard work, time and effort put into something, to go see something, to go visit something. But so I was just thinking of the foot in that capacity. And then, you know, the head, the Egyptians, I would argue, invented the first visualized hell realm. They're the ones that hell, where, you know, where the fires eat up those who are immoral or not good. And the, you know, the Amduat, the book of that which is in the underworld, or the book of Gates, they show these hell realms. And in these hell realms, body parts are important in that they are removed from people. So you get people that are missing hands and feet, that are missing their head, that are cut up into different parts, because you can disembody, but you can also fragment the body. And that fragmentation is something that happens to the immoral in hell. It's also what Seth does to Osiris when he murders him and puts his body parts all over Egypt, such that Isis has to go and collect them. She finds them all, but she cannot find the penis. The penis has been swallowed by the fish. So she has to make it herself magically. And then she can have sexual, well, then he recreates himself. Then she can have sexual intercourse with him to conceive Horus. But all of these body parts are so important for Egyptian understandings. And they can all be used as tools of power. I mean, we didn't even discuss Seth raping his nephew Horus. That's another thing.
That's
so.
Well, I do want to just comment on what you said there. I was literally going to ask you to tie this into how important the body was to the Egyptians, who are crafting and circulating and continuing the mythology which reflects the human. For me, it looks, again, as my observations on Yahweh, the Bible, when you read about these gods, when you see them, they reflect the people. They are a mirror image, so to speak, of the ideas of the people in which are crafting and continuing to circulate these ideas. For me, oh, we lost her. Uh-oh. Hold on.
Uh-oh.
She must. There you go. There you go.
Scary. I went away.
Oh, yeah, okay. You're here now. You're here in the flesh.
Okay.
For me, I look at it, and this is an evidence for me that makes me think these are made up by humans to make it through tough times, to explain the world, the natural world around them, why we act the way we do, why things are the way they are. The gods are kind of reflections of the human imagination and all of these things. I know others think that the vice versa is the case. I tend to think the primary one is the one I'm describing here. But
let me push back. Can I push back really fast?
Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So what if we enter an ancient Egyptian mindset in which everything is materialized, everything is physicalized, right? Because in ancient Egypt, in the desert, you put a body out there, it will last. The skin and the hair will be preserved. You bury that body in the dry desert sands, you will get a natural mummification. It's how mummification was created. It was created naturally by the earth's body. So I would say that if we were both ancient Egyptian and we were living 4,000 years ago, we would understand the earth as an embodied place that could either be Seth-like out in the desert or Osiris-like with the black land of the inundation. We would understand the Nile River as a giant ejaculation of the god, his effluence, his seeds spreading throughout the land and creating this black regenerative soil. We would understand the sun in the sky as one of the strongest forces in our world that dries out and decays and burns, but also makes things grow, cracks open a seed. You can see it happening in real time when the sun is strong enough and there's enough water. And if you live in certain places, this is another part of us where we're disembodied. We're not out in the earth. We're not putting our hands into the ground and pulling out a potato, which is what my ancestors certainly did. But in ancient Egypt, there aren't too many disembodied divinities. Divinity is a very concrete, to use a nice Latin invention. It's a very physicalized thing. And And so if you go with it there, then it's not just creations of people. What the people have done is they've taken a pre-existing physicalized body
Right.
that
Right.
already was
It's
there.
real. Right. So I
And
guess
then, yeah, and they add a gender and they add a name, and then then they
right.
pray to it. They pray to the river. They pray to the land, and then you go from there.
Well, so this, I think we're going to meet in the middle here in some way, because I don't think you would deny, you kind of just said that what my point was is, why do rocks exist? If you ask a 5-year-old, they'll say, so animals can scratch their back on them. But in reality, the rock is not there to scratch the back of animals. We would just say, actually, the rock is some type of material that's particularly made of this, and it's millions of years formed into this and whatnot. And the rock just so happened to be there when an animal came in, used it as a scratching tool. So now we would call that the back scratcher rock. The point I'm getting at, and I think we'd meet in the middle, is these natural phenomena that existed before humans even show up have patterns that humans see that correlate to their own bodily functions. And they have anthropomorphized the real, tangible, natural world to model it through their perception of the human. And that's all I'm saying is I think the humans are just reflecting their own perceptions into the natural world, giving them penises and this and that, because they do, in a way, function based on the ancient minds. And this is, I love this. I am not in denial.
And then you went back to the eye. You went back to the eye
right.
to make, to create, to manifest, right?
Mm-hmm,
you can manifest good, you can manifest bad. But the idea that a human can perceive, as you say, and then can make something with that perception is something that also needs to be shut down if you want to have a hegemonic control of your ideology. You can't have people just perceiving all over the place. If you want to have a political system that pushes and suppresses people down, controls and hoards the resources.
I think Seth is trying to.
There
you are.
Maybe I should turn off my Wi-Fi. Should I turn off my Wi-Fi?
I don't know. Would that help?
Let's try it.
Seth is working overtime, ladies and gentlemen.
Let's see if is that better?
I can hear you and I see you. You're there.
Okay. So we'll leave it this way, because if the Wi-Fi is shitty McShitty, this iPad is connected to internet, so we're good.
Right.
She said confidently. If it gets really bad, I'll hook back up. So let me know.
No worries. Do you want me to just jump into super chat? You make your point. Sorry,
no,
make
no,
your
I
point,
did.
and then...
You're good. No, I got it.
Okay.
And
I think
it's got a life of its own.
We're on the same page, and I'm trying to get people to like not just be like fundamentalist about any of this and try to be open to ideas that aren't, it must be this way, even atheists, right?
Yeah. I mean, as you know, I'm not good at a lot of the fundamentalist discussions because they go into these complicated mind spirals, and I'm just like, and I often just transcend them. But let's see what happens. I love getting the questions.
Well, I think usually we get really good ones. Usually. Scott Duke in the house. The best decisions you have ever made, Derek, are when you have Dr. Cooney on the show.
That's sweet.
I feel the same way. And if you haven't already, she's got several books. This one you got to get is the latest, but there's a lot of them. I swear by her books. They're fun reads. They're not overly complicated. She can get technical, though. If you need the sources, we can always do follow-ups. Doc Pleuromanot in the house, thank you so much. Because mythic iconography has been refracted through a textual lens, and there's a long redactional polemic history written long after the fact, do you see any difficulty in synthesizing archaeology and source criticism?
It's a complicated question.
I know. He is a complicated person.
Yeah. I mean, you could write novels you could write volumes about this. Novels too, I suppose. But the idea of something being textualized means that something is scripturalized. I mean, just take the Bible. You get a Bible that was formed at the Council of Nicaea, a city in modern day Turkey, Anatolia, at a time when one ruler was able to lock down what they thought Christianity should be. Some things were considered apocryphal. Some things were considered problematic and not included. Some things were included in this scripture. And since that moment, we're dealing with that biblical reality, that text. And then all of these other Gnostic gospels are not included, right? There's a ton of other Christian information out there that isn't included in a typical Christian's life because it's not the Bible that they know. If we talk to an Ethiopian Christian, we would get a very different understanding of Christianity because they have Josephus in their Bible. So in a different place and time, the Ethiopian Bible was not created in the town of Nicaea in Anatolia, but in a different place and in a different way. But it was scripturalized nonetheless as well. So you're going to have always different understandings once you scripturalize something because it makes it seem as if it never changed. When you bring in every text, then the mind of a person who's brought up with blinders on in that cult-like space will then explode, because then you realize there was a flood story before the flood story. You realize that there are storm gods all over the place. You realize that all the storm gods have wives. You realize that many of the texts that are told in a Hebrew Bible are told in another place and with different variances. And then there's no one true story. There's just humans trying to come up with how the world around them works. So,
I make titles, meet the real God of the Bible. And then these scholars come in and go, which one? And I'm like, it's the same God, right? No. There's so many versions of that God alone with the same name. And that's a shocker. To even swallow that pill is difficult enough. And then how do we get back to connecting, like this question is asking, connecting archaeology with source criticism? This is not an easy thing to do.
And archaeology is what opens it up. Archaeology is what finds a Gnostic gospel in a tomb and then reveals that and publishes that so that you can then work with it and go, oh my God, that was excluded from the Bible, but it could have been included. And there are elements of it that are here or there. Archaeology is what messes with your mind. So please go to the archaeology because the story will always be that much more complicated. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Juanita GC, thank you for being a member and the super chat. No message, but if I did a sticker, you would look for a comment. This is every time. You know me too well. Please bring back Dr. Karakuni. Bring the Dr. Karakuni back. Of course. I want to have you back for so many other discussions, controversial ones, and just fun deep dives. Plus, we just did a recording that is being edited, which is
cool.
You and me.
That's great. Yeah, I remember. I was there.
It's being edited. I know, right? I was about to say, Kara, you were there. We are responding to the Graham Hancock pyramid, Flint Dibble, real archaeologist debate / conversation on Joe Rogan's podcast, and addressing questions about the pyramids. Like, do we know who actually built them? Do we have any ideas of how they may have built them? And we go into a deep dive on that. That'll be out sometime soon. But why not ask an Egyptologist who specializes in the field of ancient Egypt what her thoughts were? And we dug into that. And, did you ever even watch that debate?
I didn't. The Flint Dibble versus Joe Rogan, but I read a whole lot about it.
Okay.
So I didn't. I should listen to it. I really should. But everyone was like, he did a great job. And I don't know. I don't think I've met Flint Dibble, but we're friends on social media, etc. He's really sharp, and he's like a Bill Nye the Science Guy out in the social media world in a really useful way to help to personalize archaeology to make it less antithetical to ideology and to help open people's minds to see that many things can be possible at the same time.
I enjoyed it, and I hope maybe when you're bored and you have nothing else important to do, because, I don't know, you're just a mom and a professor, and, you kind of have things in life to do, to check it out and give me your thoughts on it, of course, but that'll be coming out. I'm actually interviewing him in May, as well as Dr. David Miano, who is an archaeologist as well, and we're going to go into, I want to talk about Atlantis. I want to talk about all that crazy stuff, the fun stuff. We have one more super chat here. And JC in the house says, the volutes and tree of life symbols of early capital orders are concealed by the Corinthian acanthus, as Jesus was crowned with acanthine thorns. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you are. So he's talking about columns, and he's talking about the tops of columns and the plants that come off of the tops of columns. And but it's dealing with symbolism that I don't really know. So JC, I'm not going to be able to answer this one. If there's any symbolism in here, it's not going to be me. And I'm not a Christian scholar. I'm an Egyptologist. So, but I love tree of life stuff. The ancient Egyptians didn't do a whole lot. They had trees. They had a tree goddess. They had the sycamore fig, sycomore with an O, not sycamore like the European tree. And it's this ficus that when you scratch it on its surface, the bark will emit this milky substance that everyone associated in the ancient world with milk. And so this is the tree goddess, and she gives you the waters of life, and she's depicted on coffins and anything else where you would need a resurrection. But this tree of life does not have the kinds of symbolisms you get in the Hebrew Bible. So wow. Trees are important, but it's not going to have the same understanding. And as for what thorn was used for Jesus's crown of thorns, I've heard many different things. There is a tree called Christ thorn, which is the tamarisk tree. So some people do associate that with the tamarisk tree, not acanthine thorns. But that's going to be the limit of my botanical knowledge right now.
I just promoted JC to mod, because sometimes just you get some stuff in the chat. You got to kind of make sure, not only for the sake of others, but also respect, and then also YouTube watches stuff. Dr. Cooney, we've got to do a shameless plug on the way out here. We have a few courses that are, we're visualizing them being done, which is going to happen. And your book, of course, the one I have in person right now, and I have a couple ebooks of yours online. Any plug, anything we can get you on the way out?
Mean, this book right now, as we are dealing with authoritarian rulers all over the world now cloaking themselves in a different kind of ideology. And I'll say that ideology is democracy. We have authoritarian rulers using ideology, sometimes Christian, sometimes just founding fathers' democracy of America. I think this book is more important than ever. And it goes back in time, far back, right? I start with Khufu. So you're going back for 4,500 years to be able to look at how power works, but in a different world, through a different lens, so that you can recognize it more easily. And then you can bring that understanding of how power works back into your world today. So as I watch my tax dollars being used to bomb the crap out of people in Gaza, and as I speak out against that, I find this book to be powerful. As I support my students in their protests against that American support of that senseless war, I look to this book, and this book helps me to understand power in all kinds of ways. So, yeah.
I really thank you for your time. JC dropped another little $2 super chat here. JC, I don't even know where to begin on how to follow this, but I'm shamelessly plugging you as we're taking this final one here. So no more after this.
That's really funny. Thanks, JC. Yeah, I don't know. And saffron, I don't know if it's native to Egypt. But anyway, yeah, plants are always fun. JC, why don't you look at the mandrake? Egyptians love to show the mandrake. And if we're going back to the body, you can Google Ramses III harem scene. And there, the king, instead of being shown with an erect penis, is shown holding the mandrake fruit on his lap, because the mandrake was an aphrodisiac and actually apparently was the Viagra of the ancient world. So you can go to the mandrake. That's the plant that I'll
I literally think the Bible says something about Rachel asking Reuben, the oldest son of Leah, for a mandrake plant.
Yeah. That's as sexy as you can get. That's to help the men who can't do for themselves.
Seriously, I love you, and I thank you for your time. I hope people will get these books, sign up for your podcast, check it all out. and drop a comment, share this, do the typical things if you want to get this information out there.
That's awesome. Derek, thanks so much. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Love everybody.